You don't know the first thing about building something real. Those were the last words my father said to me before I left for Los Angeles. Just a throwaway line during an argument about jobs and futures, tossed out like a beer can on the side of the road. But it stuck with me. Years later, I still heard it when I was alone, when things got hard, when the rent was late and the script wasn't working. My name's Cameron Ellis. I'm 24 years old. I grew up in Iron Springs, Missouri, where everybody knows everybody and nobody cares what you do unless it involves engines or football. I make movies. Or at least, I used to make them alone in a studio apartment over a laundromat. But last week, Filmmaker Daily did a write-up on me, called me the youngest indie director with a Netflix distribution deal. A photo of me was on the front page, standing awkwardly in a hoodie, holding a coffee cup like a trophy. So yeah, things had changed. The drive back home took 13 hours. I pulled up to the annual family pig roast in a restored 1967 Mustang GT, cherry red, white racing stripes, engine tuned so tight it purred like a tiger. I parked right on the gravel, right in front of the barn where they'd set up tables and folding chairs. At first, nobody noticed. Then my cousin Eric looked up from the grill and whistled. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Aunt Jody's potato salad container slipped from her fingers and hit the grass with a dull thud. I stepped out, sunglasses still on, trying not to smirk. I didn't have to say a word. Then I saw him, my dad, leaning against a folding table near the back, arms crossed, chewing on a toothpick like he was working a crime scene. He didn't move. Didn't even blink. Well, would you look at that, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Kid got himself a toy. Some people chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably. I didn't answer him. Just gave him a small nod and kept walking toward the cooler. If he was going to say something, he'd say it. He always did. Growing up, I spent more weekends than I can count crawling under lifted trucks and carburetors with him. I knew how to fix a timing chain before I knew how to parallel park. But none of it ever felt like mine. I'd always wanted something else. Something quieter. Something harder to explain at a diner counter. I still remember the first time I told him I wanted to be a director. I was 16, and he was changing out brake pads. He didn't even look up. You want to tell other people what to do? What a surprise. That was it. No curiosity. No follow-up. Just a jab and back to work. That was how he loved, if you could call it that. Through ridicule, through raised eyebrows, through silence. So now, standing in front of the family that once laughed when I said I wanted to make movies, I just smiled and cracked open a soda. Let them figure it out. You don't forget the sound of no when it follows years of maybe. That sound lives in your bones. After I dropped out of film school, I heard a lot of no. No, we're not interested. No, this story's too niche. No, we already have something similar with a bigger name attached. Every time I sent out a query, I imagined my script landing in a trash bin without being read. There were days I ate toast for dinner. Weeks I counted coins to buy printer paper. I took gigs editing wedding videos, filming real estate walkthroughs, once even shot a commercial for a cat-themed yoga studio. But I kept working on my film. It took me 4 years to get it right. And through all of that, my dad never once said he was proud. At barbecues, at Christmas, even when he knew I was barely hanging on, he'd still introduce me to people with the same smug grin. "This is Cameron," he'd say, clapping my shoulder like he was tossing me into a ring. "He's the artsy one. The artsy one." Like I was some child who glued macaroni on paper instead of chasing a real job. The only people who really stood by me were May and my mom. May lived across the hall from my studio apartment. We met the day I locked myself out while wearing pajama pants and holding a half-eaten slice of cold pizza. She was pre-med at the time, but ended up being more of a lifeline than anyone else in my life. Every week, she'd show up at my door with leftovers from whatever she'd cooked, pad thai, chili, dumplings. Sometimes we'd sit on the floor, her reading my script aloud in ridiculous accents while I scribbled notes. She believed in the story before I did. Then there was my mom. She never said much, but I noticed things. Like how I suddenly had a decent camera when she'd claimed tips were down at the bakery. Or how a $300 lens showed up with a card that read, "Thought you could use this more than I need new shoes." When I finally got a call from a small festival in Oregon saying my film had been selected, I didn't tell my dad. I told May and Mom. May cried. Mom just smiled and squeezed my hand. "You're not quitting school, right?" she asked softly. I was. I knew it before the words came out. I couldn't sit through another lecture about camera theory when Netflix had emailed me about a meeting. They'd seen the film after a juror forwarded it. That was the turning point. I remember packing up my dorm room, feeling the weight of student loans and unfinished syllabi as I shut the door. I wasn't even sure if it would work out, but I couldn't let it pass. When I told my dad, he laughed through his nose. "Dropping out? Huh? Well, I guess some people quit early." He said it like he was disappointed, like I hadn't just signed with an indie distributor that had offices in 4 cities. I should have known better than to expect more. But I had May, and I had my mom. And when the Netflix deal finally came through, I bought a case of cheap champagne and popped the cork in that tiny apartment with him. May toasted to the Artsy one, and my mom just laughed until her cheeks turned pink. They were proud. That was enough for now. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be proud. After the Filmmaker Daily article and the Netflix press release, I figured coming home might feel different this time. Like I wouldn't be just another kid who left and got soft. Like he'd see what I built and finally admit it meant something. But I was wrong. Again. The pig roast was in full swing when I showed up. Smoke curled from the grill, and someone had a country playlist going through an old Bluetooth speaker on a folding table. The Mustang caught eyes again, but the shock had worn off since the last time I rolled in. I walked across the yard with a box of hard seltzers and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I'd flown in from LA the night before, stayed at a cheap motel just off the highway. My mom offered the guest room, but I didn't want to deal with the whispers over morning coffee. I found my dad near the fire pit, poking coals like they'd insulted him. "Nice ride," he said without looking up. "You borrow it?" I stared at him for a second, waiting for the punchline to land somewhere else. "No, it's mine." He finally glanced at me, eyes narrowing like he was trying to see past the truth. "Right. Lucky art money." There it was. Like clockwork. He went back to the fire pit, and I stood there holding a plate of ribs, wondering why I'd even bothered. A few relatives wandered over, asked how LA was, if I'd met anyone famous. I tried explaining the film, how it got picked up after a small festival in Oregon, how it started as a short, how Netflix saw the pitch and funded a full rewrite. But every conversation turned sideways. "Oh, that's cool," my cousin Luke said, chewing on coleslaw. "So you just, tell actors what to do?" "I heard working on breaks pays better," Uncle Mitch chimed in, chuckling. I nodded, lips tight. Every time I opened my mouth, someone veered the conversation back to something real. Back to timing belts and brake pads and whose Silverado had the better exhaust. Even when I tried to share a moment, talk about the story behind the film, or what it felt like seeing my name on a press kit, it got shut down. Sure, but at the end of the day, cameras don't fix cars, my dad muttered later, when we were both grabbing sodas from the cooler. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to say, "Look at me, Dad. I made something from nothing. Just like you did, under hoods and lifts, except mine's on a screen." But all I did was nod. He cracked his can open and walked away before I could say anything. I stood there alone, a grown man with everything I thought I'd wanted, and still I felt like that kid in the garage, holding the flashlight wrong and getting scolded for it. By the next morning, it had already started. The first rumor came from my cousin Sherry, who messaged me on Facebook like she was doing me a favor. "Hey Cam, someone said you leased that car for the weekend?" LOL. Just ignore them, people are jealous. I read it twice. Then again. Jealous? Then came the phone call to my producing partner, Eli, from an unknown Missouri number. He picked up thinking it was a location scout. Instead, it was someone claiming to be my concerned father, asking for verification that I had actually received the Netflix deal. Wanted to make sure the family wasn't being misled. Eli called me after, voice sharp with confusion. "Dude, was that your dad?" I didn't have an answer. Back in Iron Springs, I was still staying at the only halfway decent hotel near the interstate, the kind with a broken ice machine and carpet that smelled like a wet rag. I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it would pass. But it didn't. At the roast, I caught wind of another version. Apparently I'd used family inheritance to fund my film. What inheritance? There was no Ellis fortune. The only thing we had growing up was a cracked driveway and a garage heater that barely worked in the winter. One night, while May was FaceTiming me from LA, I just sat there in silence while she rambled about Trader Joe's running out of tofu. Finally, she paused. "Cam, what's wrong?" "They think I made it up," I said. "Like I'm lying. Like this is all some big fantasy I'm trying to sell to get attention." May's face softened. "No, they know. That's why it hurts." She was right. It wasn't that they didn't believe me. It was that they couldn't stand to believe it. Because if it was true, then maybe they were wrong about me. Later that night, my cousin Nate came by the hotel and sat on the edge of the bed like he had something to confess. "You know the shop's bleeding money, right?" he said. "Your dad doesn't talk about it. But it's bad. He had to let go of 2 guys last month. A chain garage opened down in Westport, offering discounts on oil changes and pickup service. Nobody's driving across town anymore for vintage loyalty." I blinked. I didn't know. Yeah, most don't. He's been quiet about it. Stubborn as ever. Suddenly, it all made sense. The coldness. The bitterness. The whisper campaign. This wasn't about my film. It was about what my success reminded him of. That maybe time was moving without him. That the world didn't run on carburetors and calloused hands anymore. He wasn't attacking me because he doubted me. He was attacking because I was becoming something he couldn't control, couldn't understand, and worst of all, couldn't compete with. The deal didn't bring us closer. It tore open everything he'd kept buried under spark plugs and pride. I sat on the bed long after Nate left, the silence thick around me. The Mustang keys sat on the nightstand. For the first time, they didn't feel like a trophy. They felt like a target. It was my mom who finally confirmed what I already suspected. She met me one morning at the donut shop in town, the one next to the feed store where nobody asked questions. We sat in a booth by the window, sipping weak coffee from brown mugs. He took out a second mortgage, she said quietly, eyes on the parking lot. Didn't tell me until the payments were past due. I stared at her, stunned. On the shop? She nodded. He's trying to keep it open. Trying to do it all himself, like always. But it's too much. Has been for a while. She looked older than I remembered. Not in the tired way, but in the worn thin way. Like she'd been carrying this alone and didn't know how to anymore. I thought things were better, I said, mostly to myself. They were, for a bit. Then the dealership downtown started offering free diagnostics. And the national chain started poaching his guys with benefits and PTO. Your dad refused to adapt. And now he's hoping I'll bail him out. She didn't say anything. But she didn't have to. That night, I stopped by the shop just before midnight. The sign was dark, the windows dusty. The smell of motor oil still lingered around the back door, a scent I used to associate with summer and scraped knuckles. I peeked through the garage window. It was quiet inside, the tools hung neatly on the wall like ghosts of a better time. There was a moment where I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the phone call to Eli. The rumors. The passive-aggressive comments at the roast. And I realized something ugly but true, he didn't disbelieve me. He just couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept that his son, the one he mocked for holding a camera instead of a wrench, had built something bigger than he ever imagined. He couldn't stand being surpassed. I walked around to the front and stood under the faded sign. Ellis Auto, since 1983. The letters were chipped. The paint peeling. I used to dream of replacing it with something sleeker, something that matched the muscle cars he loved. Now, I wasn't so sure. Later, back at the motel, I started scribbling ideas in a notebook I hadn't touched since pre-production. But they weren't scene ideas or dialogue beats. They were numbers. Contacts. A rough plan. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about rescue. About what it would take to keep Ellis Auto alive without letting it poison both of us. I was done begging for approval. But maybe I wasn't done building something that mattered. Something that could carry both our names forward. Even if he never said thank you. If he wouldn't see me as a son, maybe he'd see me as the only person left who could save his legacy. I skipped the dinner. He'd left a voicemail earlier that day, gruff, short, just a line about steak on the grill at 6, and we should talk like men. That was his way of extending an olive branch, I guess. More like a test. A baited hook. Instead, I drove to Westport and spent the evening walking through two chain garages on opposite ends of town. I introduced myself not as a filmmaker, but as a potential investor. Wore a button-down shirt, used words like market overlap and brand preservation. The manager at the second location took me seriously the moment I mentioned Netflix, not because he cared about film, but because he understood leverage. You're looking to acquire a shop? He asked, leaning forward. I'm looking to preserve one, I replied, but with updated practices and sustainable support. That got his attention. By the time I drove back to Iron Springs, I had 3 numbers, a packet of preliminary terms, and a very real sense that I could pull this off. Back at the motel, I opened Zillow and found a warehouse listing on the edge of town. Brick exterior for 1,000 square feet, previously a hardware supplier. Cheap. Ugly. Perfect. I made the first call at 11:47 p.m. and wired the deposit the next morning. By Thursday, I had a lease in my inbox and a new LLC in process, Hometown Frame and Film Initiative. The plan was simple. The front half would be a creative incubator, screenwriters, indie crews, post-production base. The back half? A technical workshop with real-world job training tied to trades like auto repair, metalwork, woodworking. Small shops tech. Start with Ellis Auto. Expand from there. I offered Nate a job on the spot, associate producer, operations lead. He laughed, then realized I wasn't kidding. By lunchtime, he was already drafting a rollout plan. That afternoon, I placed a manila folder on the front desk of the shop. No envelope. No name. Just the offer letter, a note that read, "This is a second chance. For both of us." I didn't wait to see if he found it. I didn't follow up. I had my own work to do. 2 days later, I walked through the echoing warehouse for the first time with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and May on speakerphone. "You're actually doing this," she said, half laughing, half stunned. "I think I already did," I said, staring up at the high windows. "I just need the town to catch up." "And your dad?" she asked, softer now. I didn't answer right away. Just kept walking, counting steps. "I'm not waiting for him. I'm offering. That's all." And it was true. He didn't need to accept the deal. He didn't need to come to a ribbon cutting or shake my hand in front of the town. But I wasn't letting Ellis Auto die just because he was too proud to ask for help. I wasn't doing it for approval anymore. I was doing it because it mattered. Because some legacies are worth preserving, even if the people behind them never say thank you. He waited until Sunday to respond. I found him alone in the office of the shop, hunched over the same desk that used to hold a jar of gumdrops and a framed picture of me at age 10 holding a torque wrench. The jar was gone. The photo faced the wall. The manila folder lay open between us. "You think I'm some charity case?" he asked without looking up. "No," I said. "I think you're drowning and too proud to say so." He closed the folder slowly. "So you go behind my back, talk to strangers, offer to sell my name to a franchise. Real noble. It's not a sale. It's a partnership. You keep the name, the tools, the front sign. They modernize the systems. You stay open. You keep your legacy." He looked up at me then, really looked. "I built this with my hands," he said, tapping the desk with his finger. "Not with emails and contracts. You think just 'cause you got a film deal, you can come in here and fix what you ran away from?" "I didn't run," I said calmly. "I just built somewhere else. Now I'm trying to build something here, too." He stood up slowly, voice low but sharp. "You left this town like it was beneath you, and now you want to buy your way back in." "No. I want to make sure there's something here for people like me. People who don't fit the mold but still give a damn." We stood like that, two versions of the same stubborn man. His fists clenched, my arms crossed, neither one backing down. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the Mustang keys. I set them on the desk. "Drive it," I said. "See what it feels like to ride something rebuilt with purpose." He didn't answer, just stared at the keys like they were something radioactive. I turned to leave, the old screen door creaking behind me. That night, I parked the Mustang in front of the motel, locked it, left the keys on the nightstand. Next morning, it was gone. My phone buzzed. One text from Mom. He drove it. Didn't say a word. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked out the motel window at the empty space where the car had been. Maybe it wasn't a peace treaty. Maybe it was just curiosity. But he took the keys. He took the wheel. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. 3 months later, the warehouse didn't echo anymore. The floor had been polished, the walls painted in soft matte grays with red trim, a nod to the Mustang. One side was lined with new iMacs and editing bays, the other with heavy-duty workbenches and tool racks. A wall-sized mural stretched across the entrance. Build stories. Fix what's worth fixing. Opening night felt surreal. A red carpet from the hardware store. String lights zigzagging across the parking lot. Food trucks. Local press. Half the town showed up, some still unsure what we were actually launching, but curious enough to find out. We called it the Frame and Forge Incubator. The mission was simple: merge creativity and trade, make space for both cameras and carburetors. A place where kids who felt out of place, like I did, could learn a craft without being asked to choose between art and work. I wore a blazer that didn't quite fit and sneakers that did. May flew in from LA in a yellow jumpsuit and ran the check-in table like she was organizing a music festival. Nate greeted guests with clipboards and laminated schedules. And my father? He stood at the back of the room, arms crossed as usual, wearing his cleanest work shirt. I saw him when I stepped up to the microphone. "Evening, folks," I said, tapping the mic once. "Thanks for coming. This means more than I can say. When I left this town, I thought I had to choose between stories and steel, between scripts and socket wrenches. Turns out, you can have both if you make the space for it." A few people clapped. Someone whistled. "But I didn't get here alone," I continued. "There were people who fed me when I had no money, who encouraged me when no one else did. And there's one man who taught me how to work with my hands long before I picked up a camera." I turned to the back of the room. My father, Ray Ellis. Head swiveled. His eyebrows rose slightly, like he didn't expect it, like maybe he thought I was still angry. He taught me how to listen to machines, how to stay patient when things don't start right away, how to respect the process even when you're tired. And today, I want to honor that. I paused, holding the moment. We're launching the Small Shops Tech Initiative. And it's starting right here, with Ellis Auto as the first partner. And I'm naming Ray Ellis as the head of this program. The applause started slow, unsure. Then it spread bigger than I expected. A few folks stood. May gave me a teary thumbs up from behind the press table. I looked at my dad again. He didn't smile. But he gave me the smallest of nods. Not pride. Not approval. Respect. And for once, that was more than enough. The incubator grew faster than any of us expected. By month 6, we had a wait list. Local teens signed up for weekend welding classes and lighting workshops. Former mechanics came in to talk about torque specs and transmission types while film students learned how to wire a soundboard. It wasn't just a program anymore. It was a conversation between generations. And my dad? He showed up every day. At first, just for a few hours. Then longer. He started bringing his old manuals, pointing at diagrams to explain compression ratios to kids in hoodies and Doc Martens. He even taught one of the interns how to change a serpentine belt using only hand tools. No lift. He never gave speeches. Never talked about legacy or redemption or any of the stuff people like to post about on launch day. He just did the work. He brought in old friends too, guys with heavy boots and heavier stories. A retired barber who still kept a steady hand. A baker who didn't believe in electric mixers. A sign painter who used to do storefront glass by hand. We digitized everything. Set up cameras. Made short docs. Uploaded clips to the incubator's YouTube channel. Suddenly, the town was watching itself in real time. Its knowledge, its voices, its wrinkles and grease stains. My mom finally retired from the bakery. Took her first real vacation since before I was born. Greece. She sent me pictures of her in a kitchen on some hillside, holding up dough beside a local cook. She looked 20 years younger. I'm teaching them to make biscuits, she wrote. They're teaching me to breathe. My father didn't say much about it, but I saw the photo framed on his desk 2 days later. Now, he and I meet once a week. Not at the shop. Not at the house. At the incubator. Sometimes we walk the floor, checking on projects. Sometimes we sit at the front table drinking coffee from mismatched mugs, talking about nothing in particular. Once, we spent a whole morning arguing about the best angle for mounting a tool wall. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. I started to realize something. This whole time, I've been chasing validation, thinking I needed to prove him wrong. But what I really needed was to build something bigger than both of us. Something that let both our paths exist in the same frame. One morning, May surprised me by hanging a plaque in the lobby. Simple brushed steel, mounted above the entrance. It read, "Some stories begin under the hood." I stood there for a long time, staring at it. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me that sometimes legacy isn't about winning. It's about making room for both the past and the future, side by side.